Welcome to the deck tag of Massacre Girl, known Killer. This 4-mana legendary creature has become very popular, and we all know why it is. Massacre Girl is a Rakdos assassin that has been renowned in Ravnica for a long time. Even the Azorius don't dare to touch her or her friends. She is the leader of a band of Rakdos assassins, murderers, general massacre people, and she has been known to be a killer because her mark is everywhere. She kills in her own kind of way, and this is because she uses Wither with all of her team. This means that all your creatures deal damage in the form of -1 counters. Then, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, if its toughness was less than 1, you draw a card. This means that whenever you put enough -1 counters on the creature, for example, you draw a card. And there are many ways to make sure that you draw almost your whole deck with Massacre Girl while doing what you love. Now, before we start any deck tag, we have to look at in which way we want to build this deck. Now, there are a couple of options. For one, we can use the -1 counter theme because all of our creatures have Wither. This does mean that you will need to do some direct damage with your creatures in order to get the -1 counters on. Wither, by the way, doesn't really stack, so multiple options of Wither don't really work in the way you want it to. Then you could go for the option of slash effects. These are the effects that give creatures -1/-1 for just a turn. Massacre Girl is one example of a card that does this. It costs 5 mana, is also a Massacre Girl, and whenever it enters, each other creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Then whenever a creature dies this turn, each creature other than Massacre Girl gets -1/-1 until end of turn 2. So these -1 effects stack, and eventually you will have a board wipe in this way. What's lovely about this is that everyone's creatures get to die, but then you get to draw a lot of cards, so you come out as the winner, is what you hope. The last option that is really to be done is an infect proliferate deck, but there are way better options than Massacre Girl for that. You could do it still, and the proliferate would work with the -1 counters that you have. If you want to see any of the other options from Massacre Girl that you could also make decks from, please let me know and perhaps I will make them. Let's look at the first theme, the Massacre theme. This slot fits Massacre Girl for one, but then there is Slice from the Shadows as well. This is a black and the X instant that can be countered and puts -X on a creature. These kind of kill effects are really good in this deck because they kill something, but then also they draw you a card. This one is just flavorful though, but Terratite for 4 mana is an example of a board wipe effect that does this. All creatures get -X/-X, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. Of course, you will want to put just enough cards in your graveyard so that some of your creatures might survive, but this is not always the possibility. Then we have the Massacre payoffs. Of course, we do want multiple effects that help us win. One of those is Dreadnought Carnage Dominus. Note that indestructible counters don't really work against -1/-1 effects. But if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. This also means that you draw multiple cards from your board wipe. So this is basically another Massacre Girl, who probably will also die from all of your board wipes. Then we have Black Market. We like these kinds of cards because this one, for example, is an enchantment and doesn't die to the -1 counters. This one gives you Black Market counters on it, and at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you add a black mana for every charge on it. So for every creature that died on the turn cycle, you get to add a black mana. Then we have Dreadhound, which I like because we need some creatures that have more toughness, because we are going to give a lot of creatures -1/-1, it might as well have at least 6 toughness. When it ends the battlefield, you mill 3 cards, we don't really mind. Whenever a creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from a library, each opponent loses 1 life. That we do like. We also do want to focus on killing our opponent's creatures. And just general massacre isn't everything that we want to do. We will also put focused -1 counters on other creatures. One of the cards that has been gaining a lot of popularity in the last months is Necroskidder. It's a 3-mana creature with Wither as well, but we don't mind. Then whenever a creature an opponent controls with a -1 counter on it dies, you may return it under your control. So you are stealing all of your opponent's creatures. And we especially like this because we are going to try and give some of the creatures -1 counters and then board wipe a lot, so that we will be the only ones left with creatures. Then we have Blowfly Infestation, which I like because whenever a creature, any creature, is put into a graveyard from play, if it had a -1 counter on it, you put a -1 counter on target creature. We don't do plus counters here. Well, not yet. And then we have Nest of Scarabs, which is a 3-mana enchantment. Enchantments we like, and that it says whenever you put 1 or more -1 counters on a creature, which we will do a lot, you create that many 1/1s. Of course, these also get to die, but we like when creatures die. Now, every deck needs a way to win. Some of these ways are, for example, Massacre Worm. This is a 6-mana creature that for 1 gives creatures -2/-2 and only on your opponent's side. So we really like that. So if they are weakened, we put the Massacre Worm in to deal the last points of damage. Whenever a creature, but not really damage, last points of weakening. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, the player loses 2 life. That's a lot. Then we have ways like Crypt Rats, in which we can do direct damage. This type of damage says that it deals X damage to each creature and each player, so also yourself. But we will have a lot of black mana in this deck, so we will make a lot of damage. Also, Crypt Rat's direct damage that it also does to creatures will turn into -1 counters because of Wither. So that is a way in which we will draw a lot of cards as well. And then I think this one is pretty expensive, but it is really flavorful here, Revel in Riches, because Massacre Girl does get paid a lot for her massacres. It's a 5-mana enchantment that says whenever a creature and opponent dies, you get a treasure. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 10 or more, which we will easily do, you win the game. So this is definitely a way to win very fast if you can stick it to the board. Now, we want our commander to survive, and we especially want her to grow from slash effects. So the temporary effect will wear off, your opponent's creatures will have died, and we want our commander to last. Now, indestructible doesn't really work, but there is one way in which we can grant her more power than she loses. This effect comes in 2 forms, Eternal First and Tarian Soul Cleaver, and the most important part on those cards is the +1 counter you get whenever a creature an opponent controls dies. So if you can make sure that more creatures from your opponents die, then there are -1 points, let's say, on your commander. She gets to survive and grow for your next turn. One other thing I like from these cards, or at least from Eternal First, is the lifelink, which also means that when you attack, you do get to grow your life total as well. Now in this deck with this commander, we do love direct damage. So Crypt Rats was one example. We also have Plague Spitter, which does 1 damage, and then when it dies, another damage to each creature and each player. This turns into -1 counters. And then we have Dread Presence, which will be really good because whenever a swamp enters the battlefield under your control, you can have it deal 2 damage to any target. It could be a player, but could also be a creature. And that means that they get 2 -1 counters. And you gain 2 life, which is... Now one effect that will be better than in most decks is giving your opponents tokens, especially ones that are really weak. So Clackbridge Troll, for example, gives your opponents an opponent 3 0/1 goats, And these get to die, and these get to draw you 3 cards. So it's 5 mana, draw 3 cards, and you get an 8/8. That might survive from your board wipes. Then we have Genesis Chamber, a 2 mana artifact that says that as long as it's untapped, anyone that plays a creature gets a 1/1 mirror artifact creature token that you get to kill. And then a Grown Horse says, at the beginning of your upkeep, every opponent creates a 1/1. Which you also love, because for one, you get the 1/1 because a Grown Horse enters the battlefield and an opponent gains control of it. But you also love it because 2 of your other opponents will get a 1/1 as well, that you can then again kill. Then one way I love to finish the game is Resurrection. In this deck, I think is the only deck I have seen recently that really loves Thrilling and Core in it. For 5 mana, it's an instant that says put onto the battlefield under your control all creature cards in all graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. From the amount of cheap board wipes that you have in this deck, this card will really shine. Then we have Kisa Glorious Resurrector, which does have a big drawback because she says if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead, so it doesn't die. At the beginning of your upkeep though, you put all creature cards exiled with Kisa onto the battlefield under your control. They do gain Decade. So you get to attack with the creatures, but then when they do attack you have to sacrifice them at the end of combat. You could also keep them for their effects of course, but I love this way of winning because it's a little bit evil. And then we have a really fun effect, which is Undying, which says when this creature dies, if it had no +1 counters on it, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1 counter on it. From the fact that we are going to kill a lot of creatures with -1 counters though, this creature will really be Undying. Treacherous Pit Dweller is a really fun example. On top of that, because it says when it enters the battlefield from a graveyard, so when it returns from Undying for example, target opponent gains control of it. So this 3 toughness, it's a lot, creature you can kill over and over on your opponent's side, and that's our favorite side to kill creatures from. These last 3 themes will be very generic, so I want to already thank you for watching. If you don't need to see card draw, mana rocks and anything you need for mono black decks, but let's continue with card draw. Card draw, we want a lot of card draw, and black has a lot of good ones, so we take the best, like Sign in Blood, Read the Bones and Fraction Arena. We have a mono black package in which we at least need Cabal Coffers, which adds a black mana for each swamp you control. Cryptcast, which doubles the black mana sort of for every normal swamp at least that taps. And then Bontus Monument for 3 mana makes all your black creature spells 1 less to cast, which is really good in any mono black deck that has a few creatures. And then we have some mana rocks like Charcoal Diamond, which is a 2 mana tapped rock that adds black mana. Felwar Stone, which adds mana from your opponent's colors, but I still don't mind because it's 2 mana. And 2 mana as well as Thought Vessel. We will draw a lot of cards in this deck. You have no maximum hand size and you add a colorless mana. Again, I want to thank you for watching and have a nice day.